And so we're at that place where we see King Hezekiah. He takes it to the Lord in prayer. I mean, he literally takes the letter to the house of the Lord and he lays it out before the Lord and he begins to pray to God. And he begins to address God according to his nature, the nature of God, that he needs to show up for him in this moment, right? He calls God the Lord of hosts, right? That means that it's the Lord of armies, because that's what Hezekiah needs to fight on his behalf. He needs some power, some manpower, right? Angel power, whatever the case may be. But he needs God to show up like a mighty army and deliver them from their enemies. And next, he addresses God in his prayer as the God of Israel, right? That's the covenant God. That's the God that keeps covenant with his people. And then he goes on to say the one who dwells between the cherubim, right? And that's addressing God's majesty, right? Surely the one who dwells between the cherubim will never allow Rabshakeh's blasphemies to go unpunished. So that means that God is majestic. He's the sovereign God. And the nerve of this servant of the king of Assyria to come and lay out all these blasphemies on God, right? And begin to just mock him and blaspheme and just talk trash the way that he was doing. He goes on to say, you are God. You alone are God. So he addresses him as the one and only God, right? He says, you are God alone. Basically, there is no other, right? And so that's reverence for God. That's saying that he's sovereign. And so that's where God wants us back in this season. I said it in my very first video, I think, way back when God was saying that he wants us to get back to reverence, right? To acknowledging who he is. So it's so important in this hour that we do that. All right. And so he goes on to, just lay his praises on God. You created the heaven and the earth. That's one of my favorite. And I throw it in there and everything in between. The whole earth is full of your glory, and your loving kindness is better than life. I heard somebody say that a long time ago and it stuck with me. That praise just stuck with me and I haven't been able to shake it. And so he just tells God that, all of the blasphemies and the mockeries and everything that this man has done, I need you to show up for us. So maybe you will defend your honor and come, even if you don't come on our behalf, but come in defense of your name. And so he tells God, he says, everything that this man says is true about how they destroyed the other gods, right? The gods of the other nations. I mean, completely destroyed them. There are none left, right? The nations were taken over, right? They were laid waste by the Assyrian forces. There are no kings left to tell the story, right? There's nothing left of their conquest in the past. And so even remember the Assyrian king said, what makes you think you're any different? And I mean, if your faith isn't strong, like I said, when your faith isn't strong, the lies begin to sound like the truth, right? But that was actually a truth as far as what he was saying, because he was able to overcome the other nations and destroy their gods. But, he's not going to be able to overcome the true and the living God. That was the lie. When he says, don't think that your God is going to be able to deliver you. Oh, the devil is a lie. My God can and will deliver me, just like the 3 Hebrew boys, right? That would be my stance. At least I hope it would be my stance. If I find myself in a life or death situation, that I would choose God every time, hands down. But we know it's not an easy thing. So I'm not sitting here acting like it's easy, because that's a situation where, I mean, your faith is tested to the utmost extreme, right? And it's either you're going to make the right decision or the wrong decision, but it's going to show what's in your heart. It is going to show if you really have faith in the God that you serve. And I pray that it doesn't come to that. But we know that even now, right, some people, children have had to make that decision, right? Children have had to make a faith decision in a time of crisis, even some with a gun at their head, and say whether they would denounce God or whether they would stand in faith and declare that God is the true and the living God. Regardless, look, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. All right. And so anyway, he says that all of this is true. They destroyed all the other gods. But here's the distinction that Hezekiah makes. And this is very true. He says their gods were false gods. They were gods made of wood and stone. He says, but we need you to show up and save us, right, from the Assyrians, so that everybody else will know, the whole earth, all the kingdoms of the earth will know that you are Lord alone, that you are the true and the living God. That's what we need. We need you to come in and show yourself strong. Show the world who you are, so that there will be no doubt. And so it's just like the showdown with the prophet Elijah and the prophets of Baal, right? It's that kind of situation that he's asking God to do, because this is an impossible situation, right? And the only thing that's going to deliver Jerusalem is if God steps in and takes over. And that's literally what happens in the next section, because we see in verse 21, Isaiah comes with the word for Hezekiah from the Lord, right? And he says, thus says the Lord God of Israel, because you prayed. How many of you know that prayer changes things? Prayer changes things. Even if we don't see things move immediately, we still have to trust and have faith in God that he's moving right behind the scenes and beneath the surface, and that he's working all things together for our good. It's not one of those things where God is in a hurry. God is never in a hurry, right? God's timing is everything. So he doesn't respond to our timing. God's timing is perfect. He never fails and he's never late. So we just have to trust in God's timing that he's moving on our behalf, right? And so he says, because you have prayed to me, and it's literally like he's saying, I'll take it from here, because everything from there on, from verse 25 down to 35, is that the end of it? 38 or whatever, is God addressing what he's about to do, how he's going to deal with them. And he also tells Hezekiah, he gives them the prophetic word, right? And that is where we're going to pick up with the prophetic word. But he tells Hezekiah, he refers actually to Jerusalem as the virgin daughter of Zion. And he says literally that they scoff, they laugh the king of Assyria to scorn, which means that he's important in his own eyes, but he's not important in ours, right? We could care less about him on that level, right? We don't ever regard anybody higher than God. You're not God. It's like Mordecai and Haman. That's why Haman was so upset, because Mordecai wouldn't bow down. But it's the same thing. Mordecai knew that he wasn't worthy of that type of reference. Only God is worthy of that type of reference, right? We don't bow down to our enemy. We don't bow down to nobody but God. Nobody but the true and the living God. All right. And so he tells him that he's despised even in the eyes of Jerusalem, although he likens Jerusalem to the virgin daughter of Zion. And he says that she shakes her head behind your back, which means that, like I just said, you're nothing to them, basically, right? You're nothing to them. You're important in your own eyes, but you mean nothing in ours. We see you as a regular person. That's just it. I mean, you put your pants on one leg at a time, just like we do. You bleed just like we do. You bleed red blood just like the rest of us, and so that's it. You're made of clay, just like the rest of us. You're made from the dirt, just like the rest of us. And so, why should we put you up on a pedestal just because you have a platform and a few million followers? You know what I'm saying? That means nothing to us, that you are not God. God is God, right? And so he likens Jerusalem to the virgin daughter of Zion, because it says here in the commentary that the idea is that the Assyrians have come to ravish the daughter of Zion, right? The city of Jerusalem, but God won't allow it. So basically that's saying kind of like, rape or whatever. Virgin is used in the sense of being untouched by the martyr, but the Assyrians came with the intent on rape, but his victim remains unharmed because you prayed, right? Because Hezekiah prayed, it's not going to happen. Jerusalem will go on unharmed, untouched by the enemy, right? And so we know that rape is a form of control. So the Assyrians were coming to siege, to take control of Jerusalem. They wanted to completely take it over. They wanted to overcome it. They wanted to conquer it and break it down, right? And so from there, he begins to turn his attention to the king of Assyria, by way of the Rabshakeh. I mean, not directly because he's not there, but these are the words that the prophet Isaiah is speaking in response to Hezekiah's prayer. And so at this point, he's addressing the king of Assyria, and he's saying, for the most part, do you even know who you're dealing with? Right? Do you understand who you're dealing with? Whom you've raised your voice at, whom you've lifted up your eyes on? You've done it against the Holy One of Israel, right? The sovereign God. And so from there, he begins to lay out the boastings of the Assyrian king by way of the Rabshakeh, right? How he talked about how he's conquered all these nations and laid waste all these nations and their kings, destroyed, completely annihilated in some cases, how he was able to take from them, conquer them, lay them out, and just, exert his power over them or whatever, and just really take control of these nations to the point where they feared him. Like I said, some of them to the point of just actual surrender. They didn't fight. They didn't try to join forces to fight. They just bowed. They gave in. They paid the offering and they gave in. God begins to let him know, even after he lays out or addresses all his boastings, he lets him know that it's by his power, by God's power, that he was able to do these things. He says, because this was planned from long ago. He says, you're just the instrument, basically, that I'm using to bring forth my judgment. Remember, I said that because oftentimes God will use one nation and their king to bring judgment upon another. But we have to know that judgment in most cases is God just trying to get our hearts turned back to him, to get our eyes back on him, to get us back to the place where we depend on God and God alone, that we look to him as our true source, right? That we turn the glory back to God and we take it away from the idols, that we destroy idols, that we destroy false gods, and that we have no other God before him. That's why sometimes he has to bring us really low, so that we have no choice but to depend on God, right? We'll quickly look to God, because how many of you know, we say it all the time, that, when we go through those dark things, when the bottom falls out pretty much, that's when we turn to God. That's when we go running to the altar, right on our knees, oh my God, help me, I'm going through the worst of it. I'm going through, Lord, help me. If you deliver me out of this, I won't ever do it again, knowing that that's a flat out lie. And so in any case, but we'll say it at the time, because it's just like the children of Israel. As soon as God delivered them, next thing you know, they find themselves right back in sin, right back in idol worship. So it seems like it's a never ending cycle. So he says that he planned this from the beginning of time. And he says that the nations that they were able to conquer and destroy, that they were able to lay waste, that they were weak because God made them so. He made it so that the Assyrians would have no problem going in there and taking control and destroying those lands, right? And humbling those lands and stuff. And so he was letting them know that you didn't do this by your power. You're only successful because you were doing my will. And even though God didn't put it in their hearts to do evil, God knew that evil was in their hearts, and he used that to bring forth judgment on those walled cities of Judah and the other nations, and soon to be Jerusalem, if God doesn't step in. So in regards to the Assyrian king, he says, I know all about you. He says, I know your goings and your comings. That's basically saying, I know everything you do. I know your secrets. I know everything you into. I know what you do behind closed doors. I know what you do when nobody's watching. I know the lies that you tell. I know the secrets that you have. I know the perversions that you're into. I know everything about you. I know your fears. I know your inadequacies. I know your insecurities. He says, I know everything about you. I know your goings and your comings. I know your uprisings and your downsettings. I know everything about you. And so since you were so bold as to blaspheme and mock the true and the living God, he says, this is what I'm about to do to you. He said, because I'm the one who made that success that you had as the Assyrian king possible. I'm the one who made that possible. You were doing my bidding. You were doing my work. And you have the nerve to mock and blaspheme me, right? That's like biting the hand that feeds you. And he says, all right, so in response to that, as a result of that, here's what I'm getting ready to do. And so the prophet Isaiah tells Hezekiah that this is what's about to happen to the king of Assyria. He says, therefore, I'm going to put my hook in your nose and I'm going to turn you back the way you came, right? The same road that you came in on is the same road that you're going back on. Now that's a message right there. Don't miss that. That's a message right there. Now, first of all, we know that the Assyrians back in the day, this is how they would treat their captives, right? They would put a fish hook. The Bible says, the commentary says, a large fish hook either in the captives' nose or in their lips. And they would string them together and they would march them all together like that. That was cruel and it was inhumane. It was a horrible way to treat the captives. But remember, God said back even before the new year, December 31st, 2021, he says, as you have done, it shall be done unto you. So notice how God is going to do the same thing that these enemy forces did to the people. This is going to be their lot, right? They're getting ready to suffer the same mistreatment. They're getting ready to suffer the same abuse, and it's going to be done for the most part at the hand of God. Because listen what he says. He didn't say I'm going to put a hook, right? Meaning that I'm going to use your enemies to do this. He says, I'm going to put my hook in your nose and I'm going to turn you back the way you came. Because God knows that the king of Assyria, that his heart had not changed, right? He knows that he's so far gone, that his heart is cold towards him, because he knows that there is extreme wrath and rage against the Lord. There is hatred towards the Lord. This isn't about Jerusalem. This isn't about the walled cities of Judah. This isn't about the other nations. This is an ought that he has with God. This is about the wrath that he feels toward God, the rage, right? How many of you know that those who have cold hearts towards God, those leaders that we see more than anything else, I mean, other people too, because there are regular people, normal people, common people whose hearts have grown cold towards God, right? So there's, I shouldn't make any distinction, but, the leaders are in the forefront, so we see them. But a lot of times when we see those leaders whose hearts have turned cold towards God, it's because there's a hurt. There's a disappointment. There's something that has never been addressed, and it goes deep, right? There's something that they wanted that God didn't do for them. There's something or some way that they feel that God has failed them, that God didn't show up for them. They've been hurt. They've been betrayed. They've been used, abused. There's something, or either it's the love of money, because we know that it's the love of money. That's the root of all evil. It's not money itself, but it's the love of money, because sometimes we get so high, right? And we take our eyes off of God. We lose sight of what we're really in this thing for, this thing called ministry, this thing called salvation, this thing called Christianity and serving God. We forget that we're in it for the souls of the people. We're servants unto the Lord, unto his people, right? But when our eyes get off God, when we get so busy doing other things, because we know so many people that came in strong and they did serve well, right? But who bewitched you, right? Who caused you to leave your first love and turn your sights towards other gods? Who caused you to turn your back on God? What caused you to turn your back on God, right? And so this hate is not towards the people, right? But these are the people who are receiving it. These are the people who are in the line of fire because of their hate towards God. These are the people that they're taking it out on. Their wrath, their rage, their hate is towards God. And so God begins to tell them how he's going to bring them out. He says, all right, he says, so this shall be a sign unto you that I'm the one that's delivering you. I'm the one that's bringing you out. You're surviving this situation because of my hand and my hand alone. He's saying that he begins to tell them how they're going to make it, how they're going to be able to survive off of the crops, because we know that during the time of siege, they were not able to sow, right? Because they were under siege. They were fighting against the Assyrians or preparing to fight against the Assyrians or whatever. But he says that year and the next year, he says, you're just going to have to eat whatever comes up because they didn't have a chance to plant so they couldn't expect a great harvest. It's pretty much going to be chance growth, right? They'll have to eat whatever comes up. They'll have to go out there and glean from whatever comes up. But the third year, they can begin to sow and plant again, and then they can reap the harvest, right? And they'll begin to flourish from that point. And so he says, out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant. Remember, there's only going to be a remnant to come out to survive, right? The siege of the Assyrians, because the Assyrians, they wanted to crush Jerusalem. They wanted to come in and completely overtake Jerusalem. They wanted to break it down. Remember, the commentary says they wanted to come in and ravish and rape. So that's about control. That's an abuse of power. That's what we see so often these days in ministry, in business, in employment. And so that was pretty much what he was saying. This is going to be a sign. This is how you're going to know that it's me, the Lord, that's doing these things. And he's saying, as for the king of Assyria, he says, he will not come into this city nor shoot an arrow there. He said, because I will defend this city, right? He's going to save it he says, I'm going to deliver it for my sake and for the sake of my servant David, right? My servant David's sake. And so this is where God just clearly, he lays it out. He lets it be known in a matter of fact kind of way that he's going to defend the city, that the king of Assyria and the Assyrian forces, they're not going to set foot in the city. They're not coming in. They're not going to be able to do what they thought they were going to do, what they had planned and plotted to do. Oh, there's a plot, but there's also a plot twist, right? It's not going down the way you think it is. It's not going to play out the way you planned it to, right? You're in for the shock of your life. God says that there's a plot twist. He says, I will defend this city. And he says, I'm going to defend it for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. Because remember, he made that promise to David over 300 years ago. And we know that God is faithful that promised. He's a man of his word. God keeps his word. And so after this, the next thing that God does in the wee hours of the morning, in the late hours of the night, I'm not sure how it was, what the situation was. All I know is that in the midst of the Assyrian forces being, in their camp or whatever, the Bible teaches us that an angel of the Lord went out and struck over 185 out of the Assyrian camp, just killed them. I don't know if it was a virus, chances are it was, just like the last one of the other videos I said, when God caused the earth to open up and kill those people, and then he doubled back and killed those 200 leaders. God has no problem with killing people. God will protect his leaders. You have to know, and he will protect his people. God loves his people, and he will fight for his people, and we have to know that.